So for this part, we're going to look at maximising individual performance and also team performance. And it's quite a nice following really from what you've just said there and what Mike was saying. And it's all about implementing coaching. So a lot of the times when we're doing observations or working with teams, there's quite a lot of mentoring that happens where managers are guiding officers or heads of are guiding managers. But I think in order to go to the next level, use coaching as well as mentorship. So this is good for you because it means that you get to speak less and ask more questions of your officers. And it's all about reducing the dependency on yourself so that you've got more time back. And it's all about asking the right questions so that the individuals who are coming to you can ultimately find out their own answers or speak to other officers in order to obviously realise what they need to realise, but in order to give you that time back. Because whether you've got a big team or whether you've got a small team, I dare suspect the majority of your time, or at least traditionally, is spent answering questions, often just quite simple questions going back and forth. So in order to create that capacity and strip out some of that waste that we spoke about earlier, is how can you get better at coaching rather than just mentoring? So when me and Mark are on the road, a lot of the time we'll spend with teams is what we call fact finding, and that's all about asking questions within the individuals there to kind of unlock the answers to your problems. So rather than myself and Mark coming in with preconceived ideas about what needs to happen to help organisations, what we spend a lot of our time doing is simply asking the right questions so that it's the individuals who are forthcoming with the answers to the service improvement ideas. So obviously it's all about the type of questions that you ask. So these are just a few examples of some of the questions that we see that are quite effective. So I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm just going to pick out a few ones. I often think this focus question is quite good. An officer might come to you with a question, but it's actually not the question that they should be asking. They might be asking you about the outcome of a process, but really it might be, should this process be here in the first place? Or ultimately things like out of 10. So this is something that I really like doing. So earlier when Mark asked about new tenancy processes and asked you to rate something out of 10, and you might have said a 7 or an 8, it's quite easy then to just as a follow-up, okay, well, how do we get it to a 9? Or how do we get it to a 10? Because if you ask, how's things going with new tenants, sometimes you get quite a generic answer. It might be, oh, it's quite good, or there's room for improvements. But you can't really do a lot with that, so it's quite vague, it's quite generic responses. So if you ask somebody to rate something out of 10, invariably as a follow-up, you can understand then how do we improve that particular process. So if we ask, how do you rate your new tenancies out of 10? Or how do we rate your approach to universal credit new claims out of 10? How do you rate the approach to your one-to-ones? Whatever it is, when you do that across the team, invariably you're going to get a lot of feedback on how you can make improvements to individual processes. So when you think about the knowledge within your team, it's often obviously going to be a lot more as a collective than you have as an individual. So it's quite interesting, obviously, going forward, how you can unlock that potential. So some one-to-ones I see, and I observe the notes and I'll observe a one-to-one, it can be quite boring at times, if I'm being honest. Nobody really gets a lot out of it and it's just ticking a box. And I always think that's just another waste in the process, or it's another missed opportunity. So every time I'm doing a one-to-one or advising people on how to do one-to-ones, it's always like, well, what do you want to get out of it? If you want to look at how to improve one-to-ones, if you want to look at how to improve individual processes, just asking somebody to rate something out of 10 can just be the key to unlocking improvements, because there's different things for different people and they have different preferences. So I find a lot of standardized one-to-one and a lot of standardized PDRs. There's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all, whether it's a process or whether it's something that you're doing with your officers. So ultimately find out what works for them. So what's most useful to you and what isn't useful, because invariably what you want to do is tailor anything that you're doing so that it gets the most out of that individual, rather than just having a blanket approach across the team. And a question for yourselves, whether it's coming from your staff, whether it's coming from your directors, every time you say yes to something, what is it that you say no to? Because it's like I said earlier, you can't do everything. And invariably, more and more things get added to you. And you want to please people, you want to obviously help people out. And you end up saying yes to a lot of things, and it actually takes you away from your day job, what you should be doing. So always think about, if you say yes to this, what is it that you're going to be saying no to? And these are just some questions that you might want to ask in those one-to-ones or those huddles. And again, it's about unlocking what's working within the service and ultimately how can it be improved. So whether it be a huddle or one-to-one, what's been the biggest win of the week and what have you learnt from it? Can that be something that's replicated across the officer base, or is it something that's just specific to them? And obviously we have to do a lot with emotional intelligence nowadays. So how do you feel? Why? What can you do to boost morale? Not just on an individual basis, but on a team basis. And I love this one. This is the focus question. So just name one thing that's really good or was really bad this week. And again, it's just coming back to this rating. It doesn't just have to be about processes, it can be about morale as well. So if you had to rate the morale out of 10, what would it be? So I'm putting that out to the floor now. So at Torus, if you had to rate the team morale out of 10.
That's a dangerous question.
Yeah, we're making some changes at the moment, they probably will go down. So that.
Right, okay. Yeah?
I think it'd average out about 5 if I'm not
Yeah.
About 5?
I do. At the moment.
Yeah. How about yourself, Wigan?
At 7?
Yeah, I think we was about 1 last year, so it's okay.
Yeah. What could you do to improve morale?
Wait until this process is over.
Discuss it in summer and not winter.
Yeah, timing's everything.
I do think feeling like being heard makes a difference to morale, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
I think if you're setting time aside to listen to your team and really listen to, is this something, like I always split it into 2 things, like if something bugs you, is it something we can fix, or is it something that can't actually be changed and we're stuck with it? You know, like is it an improvement we can make, or is that one we're going to just have to live with? Because at least you know then we need to let it go, can't we? Or this, you know, like what can we fix and what can we improve? And I think if people are being heard and feeling heard and seen, I think that makes a difference to problems and issues, doesn't it?
Yeah. How could you proactively encourage it? So rather than just waiting on a one-to-one, rather than waiting for somebody to come to you with a problem, how can you proactively encourage feedback across the team?
We've just done some stuff following on from our staff survey, which we haven't done the way that we are doing it this time. So the staff survey went out and normally the results are shared, but this time we've actually met with our regional director, the housing director in every team, to then zoom on, this was a low score, how do we improve it?
Why do you think it was and what could we do? So the staff have come up with, we met the staff and we fed back on the points that were low and we asked them, well, what do you think we could do? So we're looking now whether, and some of them it's going to be, well, we can't do that, but this is the reason why.
Yeah.
Or yes, we can, and well, some of them we've done, haven't we?
Yeah.
You know, they said like.
Do you play that back then? You said we did sessions?
They're going to.
And going to.
It's not just across the staff surveys, across
the organisation.
But we are going to do that. But there's now a local action plan for income, which and some of the things we've implemented. But I was just talking about that. I've got to then go through it with the team. So I'm going to get the whole of the team together and say, this is what you said.
Yeah.
Because what they've said is, if you can't do something, be clear on to us why.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't think we always are.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes my fault.
Yeah.
It'll be like, well, you need to do this. I would say to them, like, you've got to do this. And said, but if we had a bit more understanding why, we'd accept it. So we've given commitments going forward that we'll always make sure that we do that. Because there's some things that are out of our hands that come from above, but we need to give them that context.
Yeah.
So that's, so we're hoping that will improve morale across the team. Absolutely. But we're still in the process of doing that. But then something else has happened, which again is not totally within our control, but we're going through that with them at the moment.
Yeah, I think generally teams are quite understanding when they know it's something that's out of your control. And as long as you're providing that rationale, They don't feel like you're hiding things. But I think proactively seeking feedback's really important. So rather than just waiting for, say, an annual survey or waiting for a one-to-one, even having something as old-fashioned or modernised, just a suggestion box, something that's anonymous. You just done it.
It's like in Teams now, but it's like a live document where we've got fixes and suggestions.
Yeah.
So that's kinda.
Interesting.
Because there was a sort of a negative feeling about them previously. We listened to them and trying to make them more positive now.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. If you're going into one-to-ones and you're coming out unhappy, you're going to dread the next one, and that negativity can spread quite quickly. So where you've got something as important as a one-to-one, it's imperative really that people are going out more motivated as a result of them and not feeling low. But proactively seeking feedback is something that's really important, whether it be anonymous or whether it be named, because they kind of just simmer in the background if they don't come to the surface, and then it all erupts ultimately because people will hold things in. So I used to like to keep on top of them niggles, because before long they're going to get bigger and bigger, and if it's affecting one person, it's probably affecting another. So think about how you proactively coach out of people what's working and what's not working, and ultimately what are their ideas. And I was speaking to a customer, and they called it a moans, groans and suggestions session. I thought that were really good. So you can have a little moan, you can have a little groan, but what's the answer? You know, it's like what you said earlier, come back with something rather than just saying this is not working. So what is the answer, rather than taking it on yourself to think about fixing everything. So think about how that relationship works. And these are just some more. And I love these type of questions because obviously I work with quite a few clients, and it's important that I'm making the best use of my time as possible. So when I'm speaking to teams, whether it be officers, whether it be managers, whether it even be a director, it's all about, if you could just do one thing differently to improve things, what would it be? So again, you're focusing on just one thing rather than having a long list of nice to haves. I just want to know the main thing that will make a difference. And if you're in my shoes, what is it that you'd be prioritising? So again, you're involving people in the decision making, and it's not you that has to come with the answers. It's all about just asking the right questions to get you to the end destination as quickly as possible. And ultimately, this is the great way to identify what the main problems are for the year ahead, or it might be midway through the year, and it helps you understand what's important to the team and what you should be prioritising. And then just in terms of bringing out the best in people, this is one of my favourite lines, and people will do what they do because of what happens to them or not after they do it. And what that ultimately means is that, say for example, you're wanting to upskill an officer. If you're not quickly acting on something that they've done well and positively reinforcing it, then it quickly goes out of their mind that that's something that they should be doing. So I always think where people are doing something good, them quality assurance checks, them audits are super important that they're done very timely. So as soon as something's happened within the week or last week, are you quickly recognising that good work, and are you positively reinforcing it? Because ultimately, if you're leaving it too late, there's like a timeline. The longer something happened, the further ago it happened, ultimately it loses its impact. So that's why with quality assurance, that routine is important, whether you do them weekly or whether you do them fortnightly. But I'd say fortnightly is the minimum that they should be doing. And ultimately, if someone is not recognised and told that they're appreciated, they're going to assume that they're not. So how often across your offices do you show that appreciation for the work that they're doing? How often are you saying thank you? How often are you recognising good work? Are you publicising it? Are you doing regular recognition schemes? And then just thinking more broader about that direction, I find that income teams that struggle are often the ones that are lost. They don't really know the direction of travel. They don't have policies, they don't have procedures that are working for them. When it comes to performance, they're not always sure where they are. So it's great that people in this room have got a heavy emphasis on performance frameworks. So ultimately that's super important in terms of improving performance. And just thinking about the environment, we've spoken about that a lot. But Mark said it at the start, the teams that are most successful are normally the ones that are enjoying work the most. They've got a high morale. Reward and recognition. Does anybody have reward and recognition schemes in their organisations? What do they look like?
A £20 voucher.
I don't think they're that good,
Yeah.
to be fair, but I think they're looking at that as an organisation. But I don't, do you think they're that
No.
good? It's just a £20 voucher and a call.
We get a £500 bonus.
But
It's relying on everybody hitting targets, like repairs, income, everybody's got to hit everything. So you can feel a little bit like, well, the income, you know, like in the income team we've hit our targets, but we can see that repairs are voids, isn't so does that mean we're not going to get our bonus? I mean, it's never happened that way yet, but it doesn't feel as linked to your personal performance, if that makes sense.
Does PRP still exist? Performance-related pay?
How do you want to?
Yeah, in some guises.
Anything for underperformance, but you can have something for, you don't get anything for overachieving, you don't get anything for underperformance. There's no. I think one motivator for a lot of people, and certainly in our team, is money.
I changed £20 vouchers to giving people 2 hours off, because invariably people like to go home at 3 o'clock on a Friday rather than getting a £20 voucher. And that was as a result of like different payment competitions that I used to run. So people didn't really want prizes, they'd rather have the ability to go home at 2:30 on a Friday.
The problem is, you see, it links across the group, and then you've got like different. We'd say but then like there's others that couldn't do that, and people services would say no.
But I had that. I was working in quite a large housing association like yourself. It wasn't a problem.
Did HR know?
No. Why have I got to let HR know? It's my department. It's my department.
So, you know, income and say to neighbours, oh, you know what? We get 2 hours. We can go 2 hours early and this, and then they'd be like.
Honestly, I never got that. That was in like 6-7 years of doing it.
I do it where I can, so I do that every month and get 2:30 finish.
2:30 finish.
I think the challenge we've got at Wigan is because we've got our inbound phone number in service. That needs to be on until 5 o'clock on a Friday. But who else then takes our calls? That's the kind of issue we've got. We haven't got a contact centre to deal with our calls. We have them all in house.
Don't let them all off at once. Just rotate it. I think just going back to the performance-related pay one, there's some councils in London that do it. Performance-related pay, where you get a bonus, and it's quite a sweet one at the end. But also, just the point you made earlier, where you've got obviously a salary increase that might happen every 2 years at the council. Some people have related pay where you can get to the top of the grade quicker, subject to hitting certain criteria. So it definitely does happen in income teams. They're just different guises. So you've got your traditional approach, which might be your bonus. Then there's also how quickly you can get to the top of their salary, subject to meeting performance criteria as well. So that's a good one, just to get people interested, because it's all money. So yeah, one of the good ideas that I heard last year, the team never did it, but they're on about how much you reduce your arrears by if that was given as a percentage as a bonus. Yeah, which I'd love someone to do that, because that would get people thinking differently. Just in terms of staff knowledge, one of the things that we often encounter when working with some teams is that some officers might have been here for a long time, and sometimes they're either not as open-minded, or sometimes they feel like they know everything. But I would say I've never met an income officer that knows everything. But sometimes there's a tendency not to challenge it, where there's longer established members of the team, and sometimes there's a bit of a reluctance. But I always think ultimately whether they're new or whether they've been here a long time, there's always something to learn. So always challenge people, always look to develop people, and ultimately always think about that mentorship and coaching. And then just in terms of improving your knowledge on your own team, obviously we get the benefit of working with different customers and picking up what's working. And these are some of the things that I really like. So inspect to expect. So this is an organisation not too far away from here actually, and whether they're a manager, whether they're a head of, whether they're a director, they always spend at least one day every quarter with an income officer. And the purpose of that is ultimately to understand and uncover what it is that's not working on the ground that might not have been expressed. So obviously myself and Mark would always do this in the past as well, but invariably what you find is that some officers just become immune to something that's not working, and it just becomes a habit that they do it day in, day out. You look at it objectively and you're like, well, why are you doing that? It's a long way to go about doing a certain item, or you might think, oh, we can do these things a lot better. But if it's not something that you do, it's definitely something that we'd recommend.
Does anyone go on the phones? Jump on the phones? No? Always a good one to do.
Yeah. Do it when people are like to cover it.
Yeah. I used to do it once every 3 or 4 months for the whole day, just jump on the phones and have a list of rent sense cases.
If I've not had anyone on the phone today, I'll make a call and then I'll start hearing the phone meeting again.
But just by jumping on the phones for a day 3 times a year allowed me to understand what tenants were going through.
Yeah.
Because I took up 30, 40 calls in a day. It allowed me to really understand what the officers were going through and how quickly they could get through their cases or not. I used to get moaned at because my notes being put onto the HMS were terrible, apparently. But I used to take a lot of payments and I thought I did a half decent job. But it's definitely worth doing a couple of times a year, or even just once.
Yeah,
just become an officer for a year.
The best way to understand what officers are facing is by being an officer for a day. Because ultimately, when they're saying they can't do this or they can't do that, well, I'll find out for myself. Rather than just hearing it, I'm going to jump on the phones. I'm either going to go on patch for a day. Makes no difference to me. I'm more than happy to do it and get stuck in and actually understand what's working or what's not working.
I used to love it.
I loved it. Yeah. I loved collecting money, so I was always happy to do it. But yeah, if it's not one you do, if you've got a large team, obviously it's a bit easier. If you just on your own as a manager, you might be struggling a little bit with time, but irrespective of whether it's a big or a small organisation, I'd at least be doing it once a quarter. It's incredibly eye-opening for the right reasons. And another one as well is peer-to-peer shadowing. So it's great that people come to events like this and we do networking and we often attend forums, whether they be online or whether they be at specific events. But how many times would you go and shadow and look at how another organisation operates? So how many times do you do site visits to your neighbours to see what's working or what's not working? Because obviously before both Mark and I joined Mobysoft, I would sometimes go down to Mark, even though he was 4 hours away from me. I'd nip down and see what he was doing, so I knew we were doing a lot of good stuff.
What a drag.
What a drag, yeah. And vice versa. So you often attend events and you do a little bit of networking, but there's always a big room. Some organisations are relevant to you and some aren't. But in respect to peer-to-peer shadowing, you don't have to go halfway across the country. Look who's close to you and just nip over and see what they're doing that's working. It's a great opportunity to build up relationships and ultimately uncover how, rather than reinventing the wheel, just pinch what other people are doing good. And it doesn't just have to be in the sector. So think about outside the sector. Obviously, income collection and debt collection, it's obviously a worldwide thing that people do across lots of different sectors. How many times, by show of hands, have you implemented something from outside the housing sector? Nobody? Never?
Yeah, once.
Once?
Yeah. And that was when we had a director who'd come from the banking industry,
yeah.
And he brought quite a few things.
What kind of things?
So, I mean, one of them was a set action plan and having an action plan for everything.
Yeah.
And that template I've still kept to this day.
Yeah, we'll come on to that a bit later, actually.
Yeah. It's incredibly powerful. We do these sessions all the time and hardly anybody ever puts their hands up. At housing, in housing, we're quite insular. We always look in the housing sector as to what we can implement. But there's loads of things out there, whereas if you just horizon scan a little bit further, there's loads of best practice. There's loads of good techniques. doesn't just have to be insular. Have a look outside the sector as well. And then just in terms of maximising team knowledge, this is something, again, I do a lot with teams. You often find that dependent on what layer of the organisation you're speaking to, you find out how much of the problems that they actually know. And I don't want to be disrespectful to any execs, but they only ever see the high level information. They don't always necessarily know what's happening on the ground. So I always think it's important to have obviously a holistic view, but normally it's your teams that see the problem. And I always think they're the most important ones to tap into. If you want to accelerate your performance, invariably having a proactive way of seeking out what's working and what's not working is the quickest way to bolster performance. And this one's just all about setting standards. And I'll be honest, I think sometimes when I go to an organisation, I think as a result of COVID, sometimes working from home, a couple of other different things might be at play here. But I think sometimes the standards drop across organisations. I think there's a difference between being excellent and being acceptable. And sometimes we can get quite comfortable and we end up at this acceptable bar. We do enough as a team to get by, but I don't always think that we're striving for excellence. What do you think? Do you think your organisation is excellent? Do you think it's acceptable? Think it's somewhere in the middle?
I think, like my team, obviously working with my officers and stuff, we've got to that point now where I know I need to look back at their performance and review it all, because we're at an acceptable phase when realistically we sit back and have a look at it and we realise there's still so much room for improvement. So I think that's sort of a phase I'm at with my team and things like that, to do a full circle of it all again and just think, we've obviously had a good couple of years, obviously we're doing what we need to do, but there's easily room for improvement. And like you say, with officers coming forward with ideas in sort of one-to-ones and things like that, and there's fortnightly catch-ups, we can see the rooms for improvement. It's then implementing it and getting us back going through that phase.
Yeah, I always remember years ago, was leading a team and they were a really good performing team. Absolutely loved them, probably the best team I ever managed. But I noticed that standards were starting to slip. So what was happening is that people would come in at 9 o'clock to start their shift, and they'd come in dead on 9 o'clock. It might take a couple of minutes to log on. Then they'd go and make a brew for everyone. Then they'd go and get their breakfast, bit of porridge, slice of toast. It wouldn't actually start work till about 9:45. And then I was looking around thinking, got about 9 or 10 officers doing this. We're wasting loads and loads of minutes. And then people would start logging off at about 4:15, 4:20. Even though their shift was till 5 o'clock. And all of these minutes were being lost and standards were slipping. So I got an email out to everyone and just said, you've done great, but we need to get back to basics in terms of improving those standards. You know, people's mobile phones being put on desks and looking at it every 5 minutes. Lots and lots of minutes being lost. And it just reinvigorated everyone. I think it's one of those where you got to kind of, you don't want to lose people by sending that sort of email out, but I think it's important sometimes to get back to basics and just make sure that you're getting every little bit out of everyone rather than letting standards slip.
I'd be interested as well if you were to ask this question of your teams, where they would say if it's acceptable or if it's excellent. So, but ultimately, I bet some of them would say perhaps it's not excellent, perhaps it's not acceptable. And again, these are just good questions that you can be asking to gauge where the team think they are and ultimately where the opportunities lie as well.
Is it a mix of people working from home and working in the office? Yeah, a bit of a 50-50. Has anyone totally gone back to the office 5 days a week? 4 days a week? Do you feel you're more productive at home or in the office?
I think it's about the individual, to be honest. Some people might prefer to be in the office, but some people prefer.
I like the balance.
Like the balance, yeah, most people do, I think.
You get distracted more on your office days because you see more people. I think you do need it.
Yeah, those kind of conversations with staff. Yeah.
I think you've got to be visual, haven't you, for your staff as well. And naturally for us, as me and you said, our output is so much more at home because we can actually just get our heads down and crack on as a manager. You are distracted in the office.
It depends on your home environment as well. Accepting to come in.
Office,
Yeah.
Yeah. I love working from home. I get loads done. The cooking, the cleaning, getting the dinner ready. No, I'm joking.
I think that sometimes, obviously, I know I've got a particular staff member, obviously, they're hitting the acceptable sort of bar. Yeah. And I think personally for my staff member, they're hitting that bar acceptable when they're at home. When we actually see them come into office, that's when their performance goes up. Yeah. And I don't know whether it's just because there's eyes and ears on everybody and things like that, but I think it depends, like I say, individual to...
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're only as good as your weakest officers. That used to drive me when I used to manage teams. I was only as good as the 2 or 3 weakest ones. And the trick was to try and get everyone up to that kind of excellent standard. It's tough to do it.
Yeah. And then just in terms of successful groups, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit, just conscious of time. But this is something that's really interesting. It's all about your role as a leader to create that high-performing environment. So just thinking about these different things, connection, belonging, values, learning, culture and purpose. Obviously when we send the slides out, it'll be interesting to see where you would gauge your team in respect to these different in respect to these different facets, and ultimately what you can do to improve things. So just focusing on one in particular, I still think this is the key to successful performance. We often talk about team performance, team ideas, team planning, but ultimately your team is just a cohort of individual people. And the key to accelerating performance is when every individual is performing really high. So thinking about the year ahead, how strong would you say the relationships are with your staff members? Would you say that they're all really strong? Would you say that you've got a good relationship with them all, some of them fractured?
It's about adapting now, isn't it? To different personalities.
Yeah.
Because you've got people who've got sort of different types of learning and require you to adapt in terms of how you would present a new process or new activity. So I find that you've got to wear many hats.
Yeah.
And when we go for my team, you literally, to each individual, it's such a diverse team.
Yeah.
So you can't do that one size fits all.
No.
It's impossible.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. This is why those individual relationships are so important. If you've got like a blanket approach to management or a blanket approach to the team, it'll never work. So it's all about, we used to call them emotional bank accounts. So would you say that there's a lot of credits in there? Would you say that there's a strong bond between you and each officer? Or would you say that there's lots of withdrawals? Do they get ultimately pissed off with you more than they're happy with you? And ultimately you're in your overdraft. So it'd be really interesting to have a think about the year ahead. How can you do more for your individual officers? Because that's the key to accelerating performance, is when you've got a good relationship with people, they'll want to do more for you and they'll want to run through brick walls. But if you're just doing the minimum, which is just, your standard PDI, your standard one-to-one, ultimately they can see straight through that. So how much effort within the working week and how much time do you put aside just working on individual relationships? Because it's probably a lot less than you think. When you think about all the things that you do on a week-to-week basis, I bet the amount of one-to-one time, those conversations with individuals rather than just the team, I bet it's a lot smaller than you think. You probably do lots of group work, those huddles, team meetings, etc. But they don't really strengthen the relationships like it would if it was a one-to-one conversation. So I always think these are really important to put time aside and really invest in those one-to-one relationships. And this is just some ideas about encouraging and creating greater team bonding. So we're not going to do them, we're doing them all now, but I will just focus on the emails. It's email overload, I think, a lot of the times within organisations, and I think everybody becomes guilty of it. It's not just the volume, but ultimately it can also be how they're read as well. I have a tendency to think that we always read them in like the wrong tone. And I often think that emails are very counterproductive. If I've got anything to say, I'd rather say it to you than email. Because ultimately, how many emails do we have to deal with every single day? And we moan about it, but then we do it as well. And it's like, well, it's a bit hypocritical. So have a conscious think about how many emails you send, especially as managers, because if you send one to your team, you've got 30 people in your team, ultimately you might get 30 back, but you've also wasted the time of 30 people if you didn't need to send it. It might put them in a bad mood if they've read it the wrong way. So I always think have a conscious effort to really drive down the number of emails that you're sending.
Just on that, Nick, as well, I think a couple of years ago I made a commitment to the teams that I looked after that I wouldn't send any emails after 4 o'clock and nothing before 9 o'clock, because there's nothing worse than opening up Outlook when you come in on a weekday morning and there's that drop of emails, isn't there? It's like really demotivating. So I just made that commitment just to give those people just a bit of a breather when they came into the office the following day.
That's why I think huddles are so important, because you can just speak to people. It takes 15 minutes on a Monday rather than sending 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 emails throughout the week and taking 5 to 10 minutes to 15 minutes per person across the team. When you think about waste and stripping out non-value, it's not just processes, it's also what you do as a manager. You probably create a lot of waste that you don't even consciously think about, but emails are an absolute time sap and motivator sap. So think about just stripping them back.
There was one organisation that I worked with last year that they're thinking about trialling, if you go on holiday for a week or two, when you come back you can delete all your emails. You've done it?
Yeah. We did that for a small period within Latin, so it just basically said your emails won't be responded to. So we did have certain criteria, so you can build that into Outlook where if it came from certain people it would then flow to somebody else.
Yeah.
But yeah, it gave that person the allowance to just have that recharge time.
Yeah, because I think what was happening was that people getting super stressed out when they came back from leave and they'd have like 800 emails to go through.
Yeah.
So they were thinking about just starting from scratch, deleting everything, and if it was that bad it would come back to them.
Yeah. It kills the rhythm of your officers as well and your managers. If every 5 minutes you're looking at an email, well, it stops you doing the actual productive stuff that you were doing. I hate emails, hate them with a passion, to be honest. So yeah, just have a think about stripping them back.